When Evan and Lily realized something was quietly slipping away between them, the kind of slow emotional drift that wasn't dramatic enough to notice at first, but strong enough to leave them feeling like polite guests instead of partners. They had been together for 8 years, built a stable life, shared bills, shared routines, and shared the kind of calm that people often praised from the outside. Yet the calm had become too quiet, too predictable, almost like living inside a house where the lights still worked but the warmth had faded, and neither of them knew how to bring it back. Lily felt at first a restless ache she tried to ignore, something that made her wonder if loving someone meant learning to live with that quiet distance forever, or if there was another way to understand what they had lost. She didn't want to walk away from Evan, and he didn't want to lose her, but both of them sensed they were circling the same unspoken fear. They cared for each other deeply, yet they no longer understood each other the way they once did. One night, while they sat at their small kitchen table eating leftover pasta in near silence, Lily finally spoke, her voice soft but honest, telling Evan she felt disconnected, not from him as a person, but from the version of them they used to be. Evan listened with a heavy heart, surprised not by her words, but by how familiar they felt. As if he had been carrying the same worry, but didn't know how to express it without sounding dramatic or ungrateful. Lily said she didn't want a break or a separation. She wanted clarity, a new way to see each other, something that could shake them out of the quiet fog they had fallen into. At first, the idea she suggested sounded strange even to her, but she shared it anyway, her words careful and sincere, explaining that maybe talking to another couple gaining another perspective could help them understand what they were missing. Not romantically, not emotionally, but in terms of communication, balance, and appreciation. Evan raised an eyebrow, not rejecting her idea, but struggling to imagine how involving another couple could help. Yet he also knew the traditional ways weren't working, because they had tried date nights, long talks, small surprises, and yet the spark still felt out of reach. Then, 2 weeks later, fate placed Noah and Grace in their path at a friend's casual dinner gathering. Noah and Grace were visiting from Seattle, married for 5 years, openhearted.com, and refreshingly honest. The four of them connected instantly, like puzzle pieces that naturally clicked, sharing stories about work, long drives, small relationship struggles, and the kind of everyday hopes that made them feel strangely familiar, even though they had only just met. Lily noticed how Noah listened with real patience, how he didn't rush to respond, how he seemed to understand people without forcing his opinions. Evan noticed how Grace spoke with warmth, expressing things openly and without fear, something he wished Lily still felt comfortable doing with him. The conversation flowed so naturally that the night felt almost too easy, as if they had known each other longer than a few hours. And somewhere within that comfortable rhythm, Lily and Evan exchanged a glance and unspoken acknowledgement that these two might be exactly the kind of couple who could help them understand themselves better. When Lily mentioned her earlier idea in a gentle, non-intrusive way, expecting it to sound awkward or unusual, Noah and Grace surprised them by responding with thoughtful curiosity instead of discomfort. They didn't judge, didn't make assumptions, and didn't treat the idea as something strange. Instead, they saw it as a chance for 4 adults to learn from each other, to understand different communication styles and emotional needs without crossing any boundaries or creating tension. They set clear rules: no flirting, no private secrets, no inappropriate behavior. Only open conversation and shared time meant to help each person reflect on what they brought in, what they lacked in their own relationship. What began as a brave attempt to fix a fading connection slowly turned into something they all believed might actually work. A simple, honest arrangement built on trust. None of them knew then that this harmless plan, born from good intentions and quiet hope, would push their emotions in directions none of them expected, or that understanding someone else deeply could create new questions about themselves. All they knew that night was that something had finally shifted, and for the first time in months, Evan and Lily walked home feeling a spark not of romance but of possibility, unaware of how much this decision would change the course of all their lives. Asterisk. The four adults tried something none of them had ever imagined doing, pairing up not as romantic partners but as emotional mirrors meant to help each person understand their own relationship better. Lily spent time with Noah, the calm and steady man who listened with his whole attention, while Evan spent time with Grace, the warm and expressive woman who spoke with honesty that felt refreshing after months of quiet tension at home. The rules were clear and respectful, and all four followed them carefully, meeting in public places, talking about dreams, fears, and relationship habits, hoping the new perspective would help them find answers they couldn't see within their own partnerships. Lily found herself surprised by how easy it felt to talk to Noah, because he didn't rush her or assume he understood her struggles before she finished explaining them. And that gentle patience made her realize how much she had been holding in. She wasn't falling for him. She was discovering how deeply she missed being heard without interruption or advice. Noah didn't try to impress her or solve her problems. He simply created space for her thoughts. And Lily recognized how much she longed for that kind of calm in her life with Evan. Meanwhile, Evan spent his time with Grace, who had a way of noticing the smallest emotional shifts, something he wasn't used to. She would say things like, "You look like you're carrying something heavier than you admit." And those simple observations made Evan open up more than he expected. Grace didn't flatter him or push him. She just encouraged him to be honest. And Evan realized how often he hid his feelings to avoid conflict or disappointment. These new connections weren't romantic. They were reflective, showing Lily and Evan parts of themselves they had forgotten. But emotions have a way of slipping through the cracks, and soon the conversations between the pairs began to feel heavier. There were moments Lily caught herself looking forward to her talks with Noah, because they felt peaceful instead of tense. And moments Evan felt grateful for Grace's gentle encouragement, because it reminded him he wasn't as invisible as he sometimes felt. None of them crossed any lines, but they could all sense something shifting beneath the surface, like a quiet tide pulling at emotions they had tried to keep controlled. Grace, with her naturally open heart, worried that Evan didn't realize how deeply he suppressed his needs, and Noah, with his steady calm, wondered if Lily had spent too long trying to carry her relationship without asking for help. The more they talked, the more each person started seeing their own partner not as someone failing them, but as someone silently struggling. Still, there were undeniable moments that felt complicated. Like when Grace laughed at one of Evan's jokes and he realized it had been a long time since Lily had reacted that way. Or when Lily shared a difficult memory with Noah and he offered a quiet understanding that felt deeply comforting. These weren't romantic sparks, yet they stirred emotions that none of them expected. It was an attraction more like awakening parts of themselves they had pushed aside. By the third week, Lily and Evan both sensed the shift, each feeling a strange mix of guilt and confusion. Not because anything inappropriate had happened, but because they were feeling things they didn't fully understand. Noah and Grace felt the same, aware that the emotional closeness was becoming more intense than planned. What started as a simple way to learn about their own relationships had turned into a mirror that showed them how much they had neglected their emotional needs. And seeing those needs reflected by someone outside their relationship made everything feel more complicated. Lily found herself questioning whether she had been too quiet in her own relationship. And Evan wondered if he had forgotten how to express care in a way Lily could feel. All four adults felt a growing tension, not a dangerous one, but an emotional crossroads where every conversation felt heavier than the last. They didn't know how to talk about it yet, and none of them wanted to hurt their partners. But it was clear that the emotional exercises meant to repair their relationships were beginning to stir feelings they never meant to awaken. As the days passed, each of them carried the same quiet worry. If understanding each other this deeply was already this complicated, what would happen when they faced the truth together? Night that felt heavier than usual when the four of them decided to meet for dinner at a quiet little restaurant downtown. The kind of place where conversations felt private, even in public. And the air between them was charged with unspoken tension, as if everyone was waiting for someone to break the silence first. From the moment they sat down, Evan noticed how Grace's eyes lingered on him slightly longer than before, and Lily realized she was observing Noah's calm expressions more carefully, noticing the warmth in his smile and the way he truly listened when she spoke. And it startled both of them to realize that the emotional closeness they had cultivated during the past weeks had grown beyond what anyone expected. Conversation began normally with light jokes and stories about work, but it quickly shifted into deeper territory when Grace softly mentioned how easy it had been to connect with Evan. Not in a romantic way, but in a way that showed her he had a depth and sensitivity she admired. And Evan felt a strange rush of emotions he hadn't anticipated, realizing that he had opened up to someone who wasn't his partner and yet had been entirely honest. Lily felt the same when Noah gently pointed out how strong she appeared, but also how often she carried burdens alone. And his calm voice made her realize that for months she had longed for someone to see her effort without judgment. And that acknowledgement brought both comfort and guilt for feeling this. Emotional closeness outside her relationship with Evan. Each small gesture, each subtle compliment, each moment of shared understanding began to feel heavier. And the four of them could sense it even if no one dared say it aloud. There was laughter, but it carried a different weight. There was silence, but it felt charged with reflection. The night unfolded as a series of honest confessions disguised as casual remarks. Grace mentioning she had admired sensitivity she rarely noticed in others. Noah noting how rare it was to find someone who could listen without trying to fix everything. Evan admitting he had learned to see parts of himself through Grace's observations. And Lily quietly realizing that Noah made her feel more understood than she had felt in years. None of these admissions crossed boundaries, but they all brought an undeniable truth to the surface. Emotions can be complicated and unpredictable, even in controlled, respectful environments. And each of them now understood that feelings are not always a matter of choice. The subtle tension grew until finally, Grace broke the quiet, her voice low and hesitant, saying that perhaps they had gone further than they intended, not physically or romantically, but emotionally, and that it was confusing to care so deeply about someone outside their original relationship. Noah nodded in agreement, looking at Lily with a mixture of empathy and worry, while Evan and Lily exchanged a glance that said everything words could not, realizing that their hearts were responding to honesty and attention in ways they hadn't anticipated. There was no blame in the room, no anger or accusation, only the complicated weight of four people realizing that their emotional experiment had revealed vulnerabilities they weren't prepared to ignore. Evan finally spoke, admitting that they had hoped to understand each other better, but now recognized that they were also learning uncomfortable truths about themselves. And Lily's voice cracked as she confessed that she didn't know how to navigate the feelings that had developed, even though nothing inappropriate had occurred, showing that understanding emotions is rarely simple. The night ended with quiet goodbyes, lingering handshakes, and hugs that held more meaning than a casual farewell, leaving each of them to return home with a mix of relief and uncertainty. They were aware that what had been designed as a simple exercise in emotional growth had unexpectedly revealed deep longings, unspoken fears, and the parts of themselves that they had neglected in their long-term relationships. As they walked away from each other, the air was heavy with the realization that time apart was no longer just a pause. It had become a necessity to process everything, to understand what they truly felt without confusing admiration, respect, or emotional closeness with romantic desire. And in that silence, each of them knew that the experiment had changed everything they thought they knew about themselves, their partners, and the delicate balance between love, trust, and human connection. Weeks after the emotional storm of their last meeting, a time when all four had stepped back to reflect on what had happened, and the quiet distance forced them to confront feelings they had tried to ignore, revealing that the exercise meant to heal their own relationships had actually become a mirror showing their vulnerabilities and strengths. And in that silence, each person realized that what they felt toward the others was never romantic in the traditional sense, but a deep admiration and understanding that had been missing in their daily lives. Lily found herself thinking about Noah, remembering his patience and calm presence. And she realized that what drew her wasn't desire, but the way he had seen her without judgment. And that clarity made her see Evan more clearly, recognizing that he had his own strengths and that she had stopped noticing them under routine and habit. Evan, meanwhile, reflected on his time with Grace, realizing that her encouragement had reminded him of parts of himself he had hidden, and that the connection he felt wasn't romantic but illuminating, helping him understand how to be more open with Lily and how to rebuild the intimacy that had quietly faded over the years. Grace and Noah had experienced similar reflections, understanding that their involvement hadn't created attraction but had strengthened their own bond by showing them what they already valued in each other. And they had also come to appreciate that the emotional closeness they had shared with Evan and Lily was a reminder of empathy, not temptation. Eventually, Lily received a letter from Grace, written with honesty and care, explaining that the feelings they had explored were meant to reveal inner truths, not to cross boundaries, and that each of them had grown by seeing the overlooked parts of their own relationships, which prompted Lily to read it carefully and realize that the experiment's true value lay in insight rather than connection. She shared the letter with Evan, and together they reflected on how much they had learned. The patience, the listening, the observation, the small gestures of understanding that Noah and Grace had modeled for them, all of which could be incorporated into their own life if they chose to. Later, Evan received a message from Noah, equally calm and sincere, emphasizing that the time apart had clarified emotions for everyone, and that admiration for someone else did not mean dissatisfaction with their own partner, but rather an opportunity to improve self-awareness and deepen the existing bond, feeling a mix of relief and renewed clarity. The four agreed to meet one final time, not for exercises or experiments, but for honest conversation, and in that meeting, they spoke openly about everything they had felt, admitting that they had appreciated the perspective the others had offered, but that their hearts belonged with the people they had originally chosen, showing that reflection and connection could exist without disrupting trust or loyalty. Grace shared that she had admired Evan's sensitivity and honesty, but it was admiration, not longing. And Noah said the same about Lily, emphasizing that seeing her strength reminded him why he valued Grace, while Lily and Evan expressed that the experience had taught them to communicate better, notice details, and appreciate each other in ways they had forgotten over time. In that moment, the air was filled with a quiet sense of completion. The tension of the previous weeks lifted, replaced by gratitude for the lessons learned and respect for boundaries maintained. And each person understood that the exercise's impact was not in creating new relationships, but in deepening their awareness of the ones they already had, reinforcing trust, empathy, and the choice to remain committed while appreciating the growth they had experienced. They left that meeting holding hands, leaning on one another, feeling closer than they had in months, and although the emotional journey had been unexpected and intense, it ultimately returned them to each other with a stronger foundation, showing that sometimes stepping outside the normal routine and seeing life from a different perspective can illuminate hidden strengths, repair quiet cracks, and remind people why they fell in love in the first place, proving that honesty, reflection, and patience can change everything in the most gentle, transformative way.